invasive species of Louisiana and a little bit of rabbits. So Kogan grass, you can see the scientific name right there, is also known as blady grass or ylang-ylang. It's an exotic perennial grass native to East Asia, Southeast Asia, Eastern and Southern Africa, and Australia. So, whole Eastern Hemisphere, pretty much. It was first introduced to Louisiana accidentally in 1912 as packaging material from Japanese imports. And it was later introduced intentionally in Florida in the 1930s for use as a forage and fighting against soil erosion, but it didn't work out well for the forage because animals don't like to eat it. It is often found in a patch of 1 to 4 foot tall yellow-green grass. Its leaves are generally half an inch to 1 inch wide, with the midrib being slightly offset from the middle, and the edges of leaves are serrated and can turn red in the fall. And in the spring, they produce a fluffy white seed head, which makes them pretty cool. And they have a high silica content. And pictures. That's what they look like. Alright. It's present throughout all of Florida, most of Mississippi and Alabama, some of Georgia, Louisiana, and South Carolina, and a little bit of eastern Texas. And that is a map spread right there for you. Some of the effects. So, Kogan grass can alter the pyrogenic characteristics of forest and grasslands, crowd out native plants, and harm the wildlife access to food because, nobody likes to eat it. So, yeah, it sort of reduces the food. Anyways, since it makes fires burn faster, longer, and higher and hotter, it makes it so plants that were generally immune to fires pre-Kogan grass might not be immune after, so it can cause destruction of plants that wouldn't normally be destroyed. It can be controlled by repetitive disking, or, more effectively, by using herbicides that contain glyphosate, which is Roundup, or imazapyr, which is arsenal. And the movement of the plant is also legally restricted, so we're doing another thing. And a good example of this is its classification of as a federal noxious weed, which makes it so it's really hard and mostly illegal to transport across state lines. And treating it does have to be done with care, though, because it is rhizomatic and can plant just off of a small piece of itself. Alright, now tilapia. The Oreochromis genus of tilapia are very bad invasive species, specifically the Nile, Mozambique, and blue tilapia. Forgot a B there. Huh. Alright, so basic tilapia info. It was introduced in the 1970s and 1980s through a bunch of accidental releases from fish farms and intentional releases in order to control populations of aquatic plants and insects. Yep, and they were released in places like Alabama and Florida, so southeastern United States. They are native to the Middle East and Africa and can be identified by their laterally compressed deep bodies, their really long dorsal fins that run through their whole back, and their wide and often swollen lips. Here are the 3 that I'm looking at. You can just ignore red tilapia, it was just bunched in there with the picture. Alright, they can be found in many areas of North America, as long as they have somewhat warm waters, especially in the south. They thrive in places like Florida, Texas, and Southern California, but do not survive well in the cold. And this is some spread maps of the 3 different types that I'm looking at. The Nile tilapia, as you can see, is not as well spread out as the others, because it is not as durable. Alright. Some effects and responses. Tilapia can crowd out and outcompete other fishes because they are better at growing than a lot of native species. And this has caused a decline in populations such as the largemouth bass and shad populations. And in these places, whenever tilapia was introduced, the numbers of the native largemouth bass or shad were dramatically decreased. But, interestingly, in one place where there was shad and tilapia, after a cold winter, when all of the tilapia died from freezing, the shad population just rose greatly. So, yeah, sort of shows that they were out competing them. Anyways, other, specific tilapia, like the Mozambique tilapia, have been said to actually prey on smaller young fish, so that's another way they're harming them. And they can also detrimentally affect the biodiversity of plant life, because if they eat a specific plant due to food preferences, then that plant is going to suffer a decrease in availability and population. Thankfully, though, they can be removed, even though it's better to just, keep them from getting there in the first place. This is generally done with poisoning and physical removal, so just actually taking them out. And a area near the spillways in Plaquemines Parish was actually poisoned in 2008 because they knew that if it was allowed to spread, it would spread, and it would become a major problem. And some other means of, getting rid of them are being looked into, specifically biological. Scientists are trying to figure out, a specific pathogen or something that would directly target tilapia. Or, because that would be, really specific on tilapia, and it wouldn't cause as much detrimental effects as another thing they're looking into. A good predator to release that would hunt down the tilapia, but also not disrupt the local ecosystem and become another invasive species. The control of tilapia in the United States, it ain't good. It hasn't really been done quite well, which is why you can see the spread as far north as the state under the state under New York, which I honestly can't remember the name of. And it's mainly because a lot of people don't know it's even an invasive species. They just think of it as a food. Stuff like that. Alright, and on to the final, cutest part of the project. The European rabbit. Alright, so, scientific name right here. Okay. It's also known as the common rabbit, because they're that plentiful. Alright, so, the basic rabbit info. I don't know why it didn't add and northwestern Africa, because I just recently typed that in. But okay. It's native to southwestern Europe and northwestern Africa. And in case you didn't know what a rabbit looks like, I'm pretty sure most people know what a rabbit looks like, but I'll just go into it anyways. It is a smallish gray-brown or black mammal with long hind legs and short front legs. And they got really long ears and large eyes that are on the sides of their head, but not. They're protruding a little bit. They also have 2 pairs of upper incisors, which continuously grow throughout their life, so they eventually get really big compared to all the other teeth. And adult European rabbits are generally about 13 to 20 inches long and weigh roughly 2 to 5 pounds. They're sort of light. Alright, so rabbits in Australia specifically. They were first introduced by the First Fleet, which was the fleet that colonized Russia. World history. It was the fleet that made the penal colony on Australia. And it was British. It was the first, modern world contact with Australia that made an actual, colony. So, yeah, that was in southeastern Australia. And then, in 1859, some guy named Thomas Austin decided it would be a good idea to release 1 or 2 dozen rabbits. Maybe he didn't know how well they reproduce, but those 1 or 2 dozen ended up being, the whole population of rabbits, pretty much, in all of Australia. Mainland, that is. Alright. And that population has gone all the way up to like 600 million at certain points. So, currently, European rabbits are found in almost all of Australia, except the northernmost portion, because it's sort of deserty. And there's a picture of a rabbit. And the spread of rabbits. Alright. So, some effects that rabbits have had on Australia are, like feral rabbits, they cause a lot of crop damage because they eat the crops. Because of their mass numbers, they just eat it all, sometimes. They also cause soil erosion because they eat the plants that keep the soil together. And because of the large amount of rabbits there's also an increased amount of predators, which has caused a decline in the populations of many animals. And also they eat a lot of plants, so decline in population of plants. In fact, they've actually caused the greater bilby and the pig-footed bandicoot and some other things to go extinct. Because rabbits are that deadly, apparently. It's almost like Monty Python. You wouldn't expect rabbits to be deadly, but there they are. Alright, so because of all these really bad effects that rabbits have been having on Australia, the people in the government don't like them. So, they put a great deal of effort into keeping them down in their numbers. And the most effective by far method would be like the introduction of diseases. Just looking at the first disease that was ever introduced, it killed roughly like 500 million of the 600 million population, like really early in when it was introduced. And that's just sort of to show how effective these diseases are. And now the rabbits are, like, some of them are immune, so it's not as effective, but yeah. But you can also do more, well, slightly more humane methods of controlling them, like poisoning and destroying their warrens. Slightly more humane. And these are also sort of effective. However, there was a rabbit-proof fence that was, like, they attempted to make it, and it did not hold the rabbits. This was back before they spread to the western part of Australia. And the government has also been trying to control them with things like the threat abatement plan for competition and land degradation by rabbits. So that thing pretty much tried to mitigate the damage that was already done, as well as improve the methods for control and prevent future damage by, like, informing people on how invasive they actually are and how detrimental they are. Alright. So, there's my Works Cited page. And dead rabbit, like deathly rabbits. Yay. At the end. Alright. Toodaloo. How do I pause this?